Right. Welcome, everybody. If you are new here, I'm so glad you came to join us. Hope you find it to be a really good use of your time today. If you have been here before, it's always great seeing your lovely faces here. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more videos on legal technology talk. So I'm not going to do an intro here because I tend to give spoilers. So I am going to pass it to um, I'm going to pass it to Beth to introduce our new series.
Okay. We're doing a series on process improvement and the practical application of that. So let's start this out and talk about the environment. Creating that environment for process improvement. What are those essential conditions and elements that you need to nurture that process of the process improvement? And we're going to use kind of plants as our example a little bit in this. So, process improvement's whole purpose is to enhance the efficiency and the effectiveness through structured, continuous methodology. So, it's identifying an area for improvement, analyzing the process, identifying the necessary parts and waste, and then refining that process and sometimes a little experimentation in there. Not everything works. Sometimes you experiment a little bit and find the things that works. And then also auditing for success. Those are all parts of that um, environment and the things in the environment that need to happen in order to make those improvements. So you need to grow anything, you need a good environment for growth. You can't plant a cactus in a swamp and have it survive. Just like you can't plant a monstera, which is a rainforest plant, in the desert and expect it to survive. It doesn't work. It's not the right environment. So you have to have the correct environment for your process improvement to thrive as well. So plants require specific condition, the right light, the appropriate watering schedule, the proper nutrients. The environment supports the growth. And it's the same for improvements in your space. We're not changing the light fixtures in your office. Well, maybe, but not for this purpose. But we need to create a supportive environment that fosters continuous improvement all the way through, not just a once and done. So, what environment facilitates all that improvement? So, first, environment's a little bit different than culture. So, think of it this way: environment's the physical surroundings, and the culture is the actions that are going in there. While plants have certain environmental needs, process improvement does also. So the structure in the process to begin with is what's important. Having chaos in your environment currently and no way of knowing where you are is not conducive to making improvements. If you don't have a way to track things and look at things, how do you really know what needs to be fixed? This comes down to knowing where to start. It can be very overwhelming. We know that. But the reward is worth it. It's building that place that you can start to grow from. So, what are the key elements for successful growth? What does that need to look like? One is know what you're growing, find the specific processes. This involves breaking down your processes into smaller sections within the entire process. So, for example, someone says, I want to improve my estate planning process. Well, which part of that? Client communication, drafting process, the scheduling process, the payment process? Like, what part of that is an area that you can focus on? By breaking it down into those smaller chunks, you can focus on each and improve the quality overall. Communication is a little environment and a little culture. We'll focus on the environment component. Having a way to communicate ideas is very important. Community board, a Teams board, a Slack board, something like that, a place where the ideas can be put into writing is the environmental element for communication. We can try to encourage that communication all we want, but if we don't have a way to do that effectively, it just doesn't happen, or it starts to happen and then it falls by the wayside. And the other one is tracking progress. Tracking is very important. You need to know where you are to know how far you come. I can't tell you how many people are shocked at their actual numbers when they get the report. I've had calls from people are telling me the numbers are wrong. The numbers are wrong. The numbers are wrong. And we've gone in there and like, no, they're not wrong. You just weren't where you thought you were. Um, so we go over them and they're not wrong. They just weren't tracking it or they didn't have a means to track it the right way. And they were kind of throwing things in that maybe the formula that they were using wasn't necessarily what they thought it was and doing what they thought it was. So it's really important to know where you're at, but it's also having the means to track that. You can't track it if you don't have a way to track that. And so when we're talking about process improvement, we're employing the systematic approach to identifying, analyzing, and enhancing the existing processes. We're continuing to improve the process. This is not a once and done. It's not a whole build the process and then this is the way we will always do things. That's not, everything changes. It needs to be flexible. This is a whole build process on continuing what you have to make it better every day, every week, every month, every year. Because if you're not growing, you're stagnant and you stay there. So it's really continuing on to build all of those things. Um, it's not throwing away your current process. It's not saying we don't, you know, not saying that doesn't need to happen sometimes because sometimes it does. But then that becomes your starting point. For example, our PCM is the outline for a successful intake from first client contact to engagement. If you put that in place and start using it without making any adjustments to it at all, it becomes your baseline for improvement. It is not the end all be all. It is the place that you need to start at. It gives you a solid foundation for making those adjustments that fit your firm, your demographic, your ongoing practice. Making adjustments to that is expected and encouraged. You need to make sure you don't take something out that's needed for tracking, of course, but in general, you should continually be making improvements to the intake process of your firm. Um, as an example for that, and we like to live what we do. Um, John and I make a improvement to our onboarding process probably about every 2 weeks. That is what it is coming down. We're adding things to it constantly. There's new things going on in our process of what we do internally. Like that is continually keeping up with what we need it to do. It's not throwing out your current process. It's not just doing away with everything you currently do. It's transforming those, but not eliminating them. When you throw things out, you risk losing the good things along with the bad. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So we want to be able to keep those good things of what you're doing and identifying those and making sure that that is what you're building on of where you're at. So what all do we need in our environment to facilitate this continual growth? There's 5 simple things for the environment that you need. You need a means of communication. Build that place where you can communicate ideas. Put a notepad on the wall. Make a Teams channel, make a Slack channel, do somewhere that things can be put because communication, when we talk about communication, it's just not us communicating with each other. It's actually putting all of that in a place that we can come to work together on it. If you're one of our clients, feel free to add us to that as well. Not the notepad on your wall. I'm not traveling to your offices every week. But if you're setting up an electronic channel, um, absolutely, add us to that because we will give you feedback and kind of get into what is going on in your firm as well because we are a team. That there needs to be a place for that communication to happen before you try to build out the culture of communication. When you try to change that culture and get people communicating, there needs to be a place for that to happen. So that is important. The other one is a way of tracking the progress. Get a baseline. Of course, I'll say that our report's the best way to do that, but you need to start somewhere and kiss it. Keep it simple, very simple. It doesn't need to be complicated. There's so many times that I see complex reporting that means nothing as far as providing insight on where you want to improve. So, tracking things like your incoming contacts, your conversions to workshops or meetings, your conversions to hired, client satisfaction, they're all important parts of the tracking you need. Identify what you need as your baseline, and those are pretty much your baseline things that you need so you can see where you can improve things. Um, but having a means to track that and just doing it at some point is all very important, along with providing the tools you need. Does your tech give you an easy way to track things? Maybe you need to look at that. Do you use an internal messaging platform that allows you to make a message board? If you don't, maybe you need to find one that does. Does your virtual meeting or workshop provider give information on attendance and participation? That is important. You need to make sure that it has that. Maybe you need to explore other options for those. These are just a few of the hardscape around your improvement environment, even though most of those are softwares. But that is the structure that is around your environment and where you want to be able to grow. And then there's stakeholder engagement. Regular stakeholder meetings and a place to communicate are critical to growing a successful process improvement plan. It's a place to share ideas, review progress, take an overall look at what's happening in your processes. This involves weekly stakeholder meetings with a specific agenda, as well as quarterly retreats that are true brainstorming sessions to set goals and lay out improvements to happen in the next few months. Um, those can be used as you're ongoing and making process improvement changes. You're constantly changing little things as you go, but sometimes you need to make a big improvement to an area and really laying that out and setting some goals for your next quarter to say, here's what we want to do, how are we going to get there? And making sure everything is falling in line with that is very important. So having that structure and that environment where that is supposed to take place is very important. And the other one is adapting to change, and that's the hardest one of all. This gets a little into culture, but it applies to the environment. Creating a place where no change is off the table is important to be building out successful progress. And I'm going to tell you right now that I know that there's a lot of people out there that are in a firm and their employer is their attorney, the head of the firm, whatever, is nope, it's going to be this way. It's always been this way. It's going to be this way. That is a very hard environment to build in. And that sometimes takes getting their buy-in on a lot of stuff to be able to make it an environment where you can change. The we've always done it this way approach is not conductive, and it doesn't build that environment and allow that all of those things to thrive in there as well. Not being willing to, to add a light above a plant really stifles the growth of that plant if it's not what it needs to grow. So yeah, so these three most important are a means of communication, a means of tracking your progress, and resources and tools for analytics and enhancement and giving you all of the tools that you need to grow in that improvement place that you're trying to foster. So, what is the impact of an unsupportive environment? What happens if you don't have it? Well, things die. Without the correct dirt and sunlight, you can feed your plants all you want and care for them every day, and they will still die. The same for your improvement processes. You can try to build a culture of communication, but if you don't have the tools to do so, it just stops happening. You know you need to track things, but without a way to do it, it soon becomes burdensome and it just falls by the wayside. Other things become more important. So building that environment around there where you can do all of these things and know where you're at, have a way to communicate, getting that structure and that hardscape in place before you start to change the culture is the first step to that. And that makes your cultivating a culture uh, a whole lot easier. And that's what we're going to go into next week is building that culture of improvement. Um, and with the proper environment, the actions and the atmosphere that encourage growth and facilitate in improvements in your firm can flourish. And that is what we're trying to break down into that. But it's very important to have that structure and that environment around there. And that is tech, that is any of the tools, that is setting specific meetings, that is all of those proper things and having a place for that culture to happen in this firm. John, you always have thoughts. What's your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking about trying to eat soup with a shoehorn. No. All right. I wanted to just expound on that plant analogy, also in another perspective that Beth was talking about. I have a lavender plant in my front yard, and I water it, every day I'm watering stuff and I throw a little water in there. Well, it every year it just droops all the way down and it never fixes itself. So I used ChatGPT and I learned always err on the side of less and you shouldn't water it more than once every 1 to 2 weeks in our environment here. I've done that and now it's starting to perk up. So I think, like when Beth is saying this, and I'm not jumping it, but it's also when you're talking about cultivating this environment, is not overdoing it as well.
Correct.
That it's okay to back off and be incremental and things like that. It was just very appropriate that that was happening, and now Beth is talking about this. Um, a quick freebie I was thinking about is we always talk about reporting and people are just overwhelmed. So I was just going to say, when you're starting your reporting, this is your takeaway today. If you're not doing reporting or your reporting is confusing and you need to go back to the basics, the four things to start with is get your marketing ROI, get your number of intakes, number of consultations, number of engagements. Four numbers is going to take you so far because all of those are related to cash flow. If you start there, you're going to see a massive difference. So I just wanted to give you a freebie of what you can really walk away with today and have an actionable item. Um, Retreats, Beth had talked about. We used to do retreats and I hated them, but they were very beneficial because it's a lot of thinking. Um, and I'm a doer. I'm just like, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. But when firms do this, they actually close their office for a day once a quarter. No appointments, no work. You're not going to work on anything client related, and it is all a retreat, brainstorming, all of this of how you're going to accomplish your next quarter. And they are super beneficial. Beth, you said no changes off the table. I want you to address that a little deeper. If somebody has an idea to do something that on the surface just absolutely sounds silly and ridiculous, like let's rearrange the desks. And everybody's like, why would we do that? Can you speak to the productivity of something like that?
Yeah. So being no change off the table really is saying that we're not going to throw out an idea because it seems ridiculous and silly. It is really that. So here's the funny thing. My and this kind of plays into this a little bit. My dad's a contractor, okay? And he always had underneath on the name on the side of his truck underneath, no job too small. And it was kind of one of those things where, I'll come and do the little things that other people don't want to do. And he would just like take a day and go knock 50 of them out in a day, because they were little things. Well, what he ended up doing one time is this woman called and wanted him to come hang a mirror. I mean, that was it. Hang a mirror. Like you want this contractor to come hang a mirror. And he went and did it. He did. He went and he hung a mirror. Well, a couple years later, they came back and they were building a new house. And he was their contractor for this very expensive house in a very exclusive area. And that helped that. But the thing is that doing that little thing led to bigger things. So when you're talking about improvements and you're talking about things, sometimes it's those things that seem off the wall, strange. Come hang a mirror, rearrange the desk. Why, what is it going to help us to rearrange the desk? And what you may find through the communication of that and digging into that and the why behind it is maybe if we rearrange the desk, it's easier for communication to happen. Or maybe it provides less distraction to someone. There are sometimes people can't, like, I could never work in an area where there's like 10 desks and everybody can like look at each. I couldn't do that. It would drive me nuts. I'd lose my concentration all the time. It would just not work for me. So maybe that is one of those things. And when you dig into that and say nothing's off the table, and somebody says, let's rearrange the desk, what is that going to do for you? And how is that going to help you? And if that's valid, then that's something to do. So it's not just saying we're going to do everything that you suggest. It's saying that suggest everything and let's dig into it because that might be profitable all across the board.
Yeah, and Beth, it's funny you sent me a video on social media, and I think it's really topical that it came up. Will you talk about Michelin tires? I mean,
Oh,
this fits in.
yes,
Uh,
it does
Crazy
very
ideas.
much, very much fits in. So, I'm sure you've heard of Michelin star restaurants. Okay, so a Michelin star is kind of
Gold
I don't,
standard.
yeah, it's a grading system of restaurants, I guess. So if you're going to a one Michelin star restaurant or a two or a three, I think they have three, right? Is it three or five? I don't know. But
I
it's Michelin stars. Okay, so this is what, and I was always confused because I'd hear that and I'd be like, I don't know what that means. Like, okay, I guess that's a good restaurant. I don't know what that means. But the story behind how that came about. So in the 1900s, before there was a lot of cars in 1900, not in the 1900s, but in 1900, before there was a lot of cars, Michelin started making tires. Well, when you make tires, you need a way to sell them. You need people to buy them. Well, they weren't selling a lot of tires, so they needed to create it, first of all, advertising to their business, but they didn't want it to look like advertising. So they started producing a Michelin, and I forget what the name of it is. It was a Michelin, a road manual. Like it was maps, it was places to go visit, it was, trips to take, whatever in your car. Because in their mind, if you got people driving more, then you they would drive more, they would need tires. That was the whole point. So even though that sounded so out there, it actually helped them a lot. And that developed into the 20s. It became like the standard. Like you would go get one of these Michelin
Guide. It's called a
travel,
guide. It's
is
called a
it?
guide. Yep,
Michelin
Michelin
Guide, that
Guide.
was it.
Yep,
Yep.
yep. I just found the website.
Yeah. So you'd get that guide and you would use that, and that encouraged people to travel. And then they started a rating system where they would, because they would put restaurants in there. And they started then rating these restaurants. And that developed to where a tire company now becomes the standard that you're judging restaurants from. Now that took, 100 years to do that, but in that over that 100 years, that was what happened. So even though that idea was way out there, um, it became this standard that now we're judging restaurants from a tire company.
And
Yeah,
and
so that's right.
hotels. And hotels.
And
And
hotels, yes,
hotels.
and
Yep.
hotels. Yep. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So yeah, no idea should be off the table because, 100 years from now, somebody could be having that same conversation about your idea.
You may be rating the rocket ships that we take to our home on Mars.
Oh, yeah.
Um, can you talk a little bit, Beth, lastly, and this is my last one, because we always talk about tech ecosystems,
Hmm.
and I don't want to jump into any future week, um, but can you talk about how we do it different? Because so many people say, oh, we need to do this, go ahead and put it in the system versus processes and how we do things different and how every approach should model this.
Right, right. So, and that is another place that people get out of step, I guess, on things, is that when you're talking about tech and you're talking about your tech ecosystem, it's not always about having the best tech, okay? Because everybody will tell you that their tech is the best tech. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to do, right? So it is about what tech works for what you're doing. I'm going to tell you that I actually I had a meeting last week, I believe it was, with a firm, and we were talking through what their process is, and they said, okay, we want to do this, this, and this, and they were talking about moving to one of the techs that we support, and I told them I said, this is going to seem odd, but I would highly not recommend doing that because it didn't fit into their situation. It wasn't going to be a good fit for them. It was going to make things more difficult in their processes. Not necessarily that it couldn't do it, but there was other options that could do it easier. And so that's really what it comes down to, is finding that thing and looking at it from the approach of where you're at. Because so many times, and what John is talking about is the approach, is John and I both worked in a firm. So we sat on this side of the tech. So sometimes what you'll have with programmers and people who are programmers first is you'll tell them, I want this to do this. And they will do that. They will make your tech do that for you. But what happens is there's unintended consequences. There is things that happen that roll into something else. And when that starts happening, then you start to get frustrated, and then you're ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater because it's all muddy and you don't know where anything is. And so having that approach of what you're going to do with your tech needs to be um, really looked at from your side and saying, I want this to happen. this is how my end goal is this. I need the tech to do this, so this happens. And then make sure that that is the end goal. So John and I will both ask why a lot. You tell me, oh, we want it to do this. Why? Because I want to know what the end goal is for that. And if the technology supports that, if that does it, then absolutely do that. But here's the other things that are going to happen. And so I think that when he's talking about our approach is different because we've been on that side and we've had those unintended consequences and did not like them at all. So that's why we started doing what we're doing. But you really need to have that whole thing. And that is also one of the reasons why you do process improvement as a team. You don't have one person doing process improvement. It needs to be a team. It needs to be buy-in from everybody because one person does not have the scope and the view and all of it. And I'm not saying we do at all. That's why we ask why. If I knew what your perspective was, every person, um, I'd be making a whole lot more money than I do. But also, like I could just come in and say, you need to do this, 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 and this, and that would be it. But I don't because I don't have that your experience, the experience of being in your shoes, in your firm, in your location, in all of that, in your environment. So really understanding what all that is and digging into that is important in doing that because and we run into this, and I know we did this thing on shiny new toys before, is sometimes you'll have people who are very distracted by shiny new toys, and they'll see an ad for something come up, some new tech that does something, and we do have some firms that this happens with, and they're like, hey, look at this. This does this, 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 and this, and we want to put this in place. And about 99% of the time, we'll look at it and go, your current tech also does all of this and also does this. So just because it's a shiny new toy and they've done this shiny new advertising, you really need to look into what it is. And you really need to dig into that. And that is very important as well as not being hyper getting all excited about a shiny new toy over there, but really doing the research and getting input from everybody else. Because we also had a firm that did that with a shiny new toy. And one part of one segment of their business, it like totally wrecked them. Like it just didn't work for them. They lost their tracking. It was a mess, and they ended up having to switch back. So that's what happens.
Yeah, and with shiny new toys, I'm always looking at new softwares because we also want to know what to recommend and tell you to stay away from. Um, and that's why we're also always researching new tech, what's coming out, what's coming. And so I'm always looking at it for us, what can help us help you. And I think I've looked at maybe 100 softwares, in the last quarter or so, and we actually only picked one to implement, and that was an email AI system out of 100 that we looked at. So the shiny new toy, they're pretty, but are they necessary?
Yeah. And that one wasn't as shiny as the other ones either.
No, it
But
wasn't.
it
But
meets but it meets every need, so that's what matters.
so
Yeah.
awesome. Anything else
Okay.
before we go to Q&A, Beth?
I don't think so. I think we're good.
All right, I am going to hit stop recording.